Now I'll always work on an empty stomach. Story from a job I had a few years ago. Level 1 tech at an MSP. We had one huge customer that took up about 90% of our work. They had this really old company intranet with their own ticketing system integrated into it. All the users used this and it was the core of all their business processes. They had a clueless development team that was supposed to manage the intranet and assist with any problems with it. And oh my, were there a lot of problems with it. The story of how this software was created is a story in itself. Long story short, it was made about 6 years prior by an outsourced company that went bust soon after making it. So nobody knew how it worked. They hired a load of devs to try and manage this thing. 6 years later they're still struggling. Anyway, I'd seen this ticket floating around from a pretty high up manager who wasn't able to create, receive or view any purchase orders. It had been around most of the techs and they were all stumped. The intranet was just spitting a load of code at her whenever she tried to do anything on there. This kind of issue was for their in-house dev team to deal with as it's their software. Also, we just did first-line support for them. We don't have the access to their systems to fix something like this. We were more of a reception desk than a help desk. The ticket had been open for a while now and it had enough info in, so I passed it over to their devs. They sent it back to me in record time. Wow, I thought, they're on it today. No. They had replied basically saying they have no idea what the error means and it'll probably work tomorrow. This was a very common occurrence with them. Well, the ticket had been open for more than a week at this point, so I passed it straight back stating this, and that it's nothing an external T1 can help with. Straight back it came with almost the same response, just copied and pasted. This happened all too often. They just didn't care. And they didn't have phones and never replied to our emails, so getting in contact with anyone specific on their team was very difficult. I was about to go to my manager about it when I got a call in. It was the user from this ticket. Oh joy. It was my job to tell them their company don't care about her problems. In a nice way, of course. Anyways, they completely understood. This was clearly not the first time they'd been through this. But she was high up and needed this working ASAP. I told her I'd get my manager involved and try and get it sorted as soon as possible. While I was on the phone I thought, I may as well take a look at the issue. An eighth pair of eyes on this can't hurt. I got connected over and watched her got through the process to get this error up. I knew the system pretty well and I knew the error was coming up just before she has to enter the date into the purchase order. The code in the error was just gibberish to me. It meant nothing to a little L1 tech. I happened to glance at the bottom right of her screen as I wanted to know what time it was. Curious, her date's in American format. No, it can't be. I hate this job. Yep, I changed the date to UK date format, and presto, it started working. Clearly the intranet used the local date and time when pulling through dates, and could only read UK format. When it tried to load the dates it just failed and threw up the error. I've never had a user as happy as she was. Safe to say my manager got an email praising me. Funny thing was, I was checking the time on her machine because I was hungry and wanted to know when my lunch was. My love for food always comes in handy. I moved away from that company not long after. I had no issue with them. It was the customer I hated. And most of our work was done for them. I've got plenty of stories from my time supporting them, so let me know if you want to hear more. The one about how their intranet was created is a doozy. The software must be even more horrible than you described if their own dev team's solution is. No. They had replied basically saying they have no idea what the error means and it'll probably work tomorrow. This was a very common occurrence with them. Excellent catch on your part, and I can only hope the dev team was taken out behind the woodshed and given a talking to. Oh yeah, it was awful. After 3 years there I could fly around it pretty well. A lot of users knew to contact me if they were having problems. I normally knew some kind of workaround. I almost started to enjoy working with it and finding these weird fixes. By the time I left, their IT director had pulled his finger out and got some proper management for the devs. As before, they were kinda left to their own devices. Things started to get a bit better, so I've heard. I think it's normal to enjoy finding and fixing the weird issues. Many get into IT to fix things and tinker, and it's the weird issues that make it exciting and give the will to power through 100 more password reset requests. 100%. I wish I had ever had a manager who got that. Why are you so cranky over simple password resets? They ask. Because I am being literally tortured by user stupidity and boredom and becoming enraged by it. 40 plus hours a week. Thank God for the quirky problems that feel like an adventure and grateful users that think I am a wizard. It is the only thing that keeps me from completely going over the edge. I've heard a lot of complaining over the years of the monotony of simple data entry, but I don't mind that. Even enjoy it. Sometimes good to have simple downtime work. But it's the simple work that requires interacting with people that makes it difficult, that is unenjoyable work. Oh, 100%. Disclaimer, I have ADHD, so my non-standard neurology makes this an even bigger problem than it does for the neuronormals. I get what you are saying about simple monotony. Tasks that allow me to mindlessly zone out, like paper shredding, for example, no problem. Something new and fascinating, even better. The worst are those things that require no higher level brain function, yet just enough picky attention to detail. Add having to be customer servicey to annoying humans in there and the emotional labor involved with that. And it's a wonder I have any hair left. I feel ya. The mind-numbingly simple repetitive stuff like shredding etc. gives me the freedom to let my brain run wild, while complex and difficult tasks entertain me and occupy my ADHD brain. Simple, repetitive things that require attention kill me. Always nice to talk to someone who gets it. It's the stupid things that often take too long to troubleshoot. Because you know it couldn't possibly be that, so you do not seriously look for the stupid answer. Thus you spin your wheels looking at everything else. Multiple times. I am an L1. I was having issues with our telephony one day and couldn't log in for the life of me. I did everything I could think of. Logged a ticket for myself and escalated to responsible group. Guy told me to set my clock correctly and try again. It had been something like 5 minutes ahead. It just does it on its own and I can't be bothered to fix it. It worked. It had been like that for half a year before it broke. It's working without any issues right now, despite the fact my computer has again traveled forwards in time a few minutes. There's probably some wiggle room for client computers to be fast or slow compared to the server. Your computer mount have finally gone outside of the acceptable range. Can you set your computer to use a network time server, either locally at your company or NIST, or Microsoft? If you could set up the server you are logging into to be the time server for the network, this problem would be solved permanently. Even if someone bulldozes through the fiber connection to your ISP, which would block syncing with services like NIST. That would be my first choice for a fix. Barring that, a sync to NIST once per day by the server and your computer would work as well. I work in VFX, and 2 artists over the past 6 months have reported their renders just being a bunch of vertical lines. Nothing seemed to fix it, including swapping the GPU. The solution? Unplug your foreign keyboard. It turned out that the very popular software we're using has a bug. It sets the render aspect ratio to 1,000 by default. Certain languages use a comma as a decimal separator instead, and if the program detects this, it parses this aspect ratio as 1000. No need to unplug. My Quartz keyboard has comma and period right next to each other. I just need to remember which software wants non-German decimal separators and I'm good to go. It sounds like the problem is that the software is hard-coded to the string 1,000, but then parses it using the localized system function for decimal numbers, which is expecting a comma when the system is set to some languages. Similarly, I can't download most Excel files with formulas and expect them to work without having to change all commas to semicolons in every cell. Oh no, now you've reminded me of German Excel. It's the source of so many problems and so much hatred. Yup, I don't use German, but the numerical formats are the same here. It's crazy how often persistence can get you through issues like this. I learned a long time ago to never take someone's word on an issue without witnessing it yourself. Different sets of eyes see things differently. The ability to shadow an end user is invaluable. Anyhow, good catch, op. That had to be a gratifying win. A surprising number of programs have this problem. I see it all the time, though the other way around, and it usually just screws up the date that gets saved or reported. It's what happens when you don't use a proper standard. Keep it in the date-time format, which is a number from beginning to bitter end, please. Then the users can have their backwards American MDY format. My accountant can have README format, and I can have my ISO. Or at the very least, if it has to be text, use something unambiguous. Oh look, there's a whole standard on that and it's been around for ages. As long as I can still display mine in hissing cat format. Funny enough, I know when 3:30 rolls around by the hissing of my cats an hour before feeding time. What's the URL for your hissing cat time server? We use Navision. Head office in Europe. We remote in from South Africa. With certain screen resolutions, Navision don't print right. When the screen resolution is a 1:3 aspect ratio 800 by 600 or 1024 by 768, it prints fine. Other aspect ratios causes it to print misformatted columns and fonts. Weird. Dunno who to report this to, as it clearly is a developer issue, not a platform or hardware issue. Fucking Navision. I think they're from my country even. Fortunately I never had to deal with them directly. My coworker had this honor, but we laughed after every time he had to call customer support, either at their stupidity or his anger. Nice. Excellent pacing and formatting as well. Would love to hear the internet doozy. Time zones, date standards, daylight savings. The issues with date and time sensitive information. Then there are CSVs. Some people save as semicolon separated values. They what now? Europe and other parts of the world use periods, dots to separate decimal places, and commas to delineate cents. So, in the US, $1 million would be 1,000,000, while elsewhere, 1 million would be 1,000,000. Some companies decide to output semicolon separated values to mitigate the problem. Although it'd be easier to use pipes instead. Ah. I thought you meant people in the US. If it's Europe, Germany especially, that's understandable. But then again, there are people in the US who would be crazy enough to do that sort of thing. From the title, I was expecting a story about puking from the smell of roaches, cigarettes, or spilled milk. Ditto, and glad to be wrong. We always have date format problems. I'm in Canada, so Windows sets itself to Canadian format, which is pretty much a bastardized fusion of US and UK. Problem is, software developers rarely support Canadian format properly, leading to a lot of weird glitches. Part of my Windows setup process is to manually set the region and language to US and US English to avoid this. That's why I've started using ISO 8601 for everything, including on paper. So much easier to read, and unambiguous, or, at least theoretically, because you know someone's going to read it year, day, month. I'm curious why these systems don't seem to have documentation. I can't be the only one who has milestones, but the date format error could have been assumed and missed even in a complete system. Good sleuthing though, and well, earned kudos. I'm curious why these systems don't seem to have documentation. The usual cause is that it started off as someone's pet project mushroom where it grows in the dark and it's beep. To save a little time on some task and more bits and pieces get added over time until it's this unstable tower of features where deleting a comment somewhere causes the whole thing to come crashing down somehow. Proper project management, including the creation of documentation, is typically not a high priority until it's burned someone sufficiently high up a couple of times. It's easy to hire someone who can get it done. It's difficult, expensive and time-consuming to get someone who can get it done right. It's often less about do it right and more about do it right now. Mushroomware, just added to my tech vocabulary. Heck yes, I want to read more. Getting the popcorn ready. Great story, would love to hear more. My CGM blood glucose sensor, implanted in my arm to help manage my diabetes, beeps itself every daylight savings change. Dumps the whole lot of readings from the start of the sensor. Yikes, does it fix itself or what do you do? That is frightening as hell. I ended up having no sensor data for a week, which was mostly inconsequential, but I still did not know it would happen. Now that I know it's happening, I can account for it, and I try to time sensor changes so that I start a new sensor the first day of DST, but at the time it frightened the speep out of me. I can only imagine the consequences if I used a pump. I am relieved you don't use a pump, as that is what I immediately went to. Still, a week without sensor data seems very bad. I had all data from the morning scan when I woke up, just none from prior to that scan. My endo was not happy. I hope there is a fix for this now, so it is not still happening with the time change. I'll find out in 5 weeks' time. I guess it helps to be forewarned, at least. The first time had to be the worst. Definitely. I had a guy write a script to rapidly pull logs and parse them for error rates during live site outages. He worked the day shift. All the managers praised his tooling and how much it cut down on the investigation time. My crew was swing shift, and the damn thing never worked. Every day we needed it, it failed, and dude would tear it apart the next day not finding an issue. Finally he figured out it was making a call to the local time and converting it to GMT, which the servers use to keep time. The script couldn't handle the differences in date. Things worked much better after that adjustment, but the victory was short-lived since service architecture changed, making the script completely unusable. The number of things that work just fine for the day shift and then go to hell for us on the graveyard shift. Oh my. And then when I complain because the phone is ringing off the hook, I get dinged for having a bad attitude. It will be fixed by 6 a.m. Simmer down. And what would you like me to tell the callers who are coming after us with torches and pitchforks? Crickets. Feepers. Always love to hear about the doozies. Date and time settings are the worst. I once misset a flag in a Lotus Notes system that meant that all requests raised by the offshore team we were in the UK, they were in India, were being scheduled 5:30 early. I didn't try to pass it off to a third-party support company to fix, though. It's amazing how the little things, like a date format, can bring ruin on an otherwise good worker. You show up. Notice. Kablam. You are a god. I always feel guilty a bit when it's something so simple but so important and you get all these kudos for literally 10 minutes of work. But at the same time it was you who noticed, so that's why you're good at your job. Nice one. I stopped feeling guilty as soon as I remembered all the times when I was blamed for something breaking that had absolutely nothing to do with me. Ha! Good for you. I love the temporal fallacy. Well, you changed the monitor on this computer and now the hard drive failed. It's your fault. Correlation does not imply causation. Except to losers. I blame the schools. Then again, if more people thought, they'd be dangerous. So true. They'd be a problem for the Uberlords for sure. My mechanic buddy bitches about this all the time. Like he does a brake job. And then the same car. Like maybe a day later. The water pump goes out. They come back and say, you worked on my car, now the water pump broke. And he's like, just because two problems with your car take place near in time doesn't mean they are related. You try to explain. If I'd never worked on your brakes, the damn water pump still would have gone down. They have nothing to do with each other. Magical thinking people can't handle it though. Same with computer or name your job.